This is the description of how I make apple cider. You can get a cider kit from your local brew store with everything you need, including juice concentrate. If you choose that option, you probably don't need this video. Come back and watch me when you want to try making cider from scratch. You're going to need a lot of apples, approximately 1.5 to 2.5 kilograms per litre of cider. You may need some sugar depending on the types of apples you're using. You're also going to need an apple press. I made my own because I'm cheap. I made it out of old untreated wood pellets and a few heavy duty nuts and bolts. If you're going to use a similar press to mine, you're going to need a food grade bucket with holes drilled in it around the bottom. I set the bucket on the inverted lid to catch the juice and drilled 3 holes close together in the lip of the lid to allow the juice to drain into the jug. There is a circular slab of wood the lid sits on top of that the press presses against. You need a small clean car jack and lever. You need a flat circular pressing plate that will sit on top of the apples and under the jack. I use MDF and keep it in a plastic bag. I strongly recommend a plastic sheet to catch any of the splashes. I'll sometimes prop the press up at the back with a couple of pins so that gravity can work its magic. This ensures the juice runs forward to the drain holes we just drilled before. You're going to need plastic bags to put your apples in because we're going to freeze them, and you're going to need quite a bit of freezer space depending on how much cider you're intending on making. You'll need an electric kettle and a couple of plastic or glass jugs to catch the juice in. You'll also need a stock pot or saucepan because we're going to pasteurize that juice. An electric or gas hob, a sieve, and some apple cider yeast. It's best to buy this rather than use the native yeasts, which can be pretty funky. Funky is a technical term that means taste like stinky old sports socks smell. You can reuse your yeast from a previous batch, and I've stored it for up to a year. I'll cover how to do this at the end of the video. You'll need a sanitizer, something like Star San, Stellar San, or metabisulfide. Or you could heat sanitize clean bottles in an oven at 110 degrees Celsius for about 15 minutes. For other sanitizers, just follow the instructions on the bottle. You'll need clean, preferably labelless bottles with caps and a bottle capper. I'll cover the best ways to remove labels in another video. I also reuse twist top bottles and their original caps, or you can use a capper to conform new caps to the threaded bottles. You'll need a tubing system to siphon your finished cider from the demijohns into the bottles. And lastly, it pays to have a couple of metal bowls handy. Small bowls for sterilising your bottle caps in boiled water, and larger bowls for thawing frozen apples. You can also use food grade buckets for the storing process. While this seems like a lot of stuff that you need, it is, so you have to think about where you're going to store it in the off season. Because I am a cheapskate, I try to get my apples for free, so I get them from a number of different sources. From roadside apples, where the seeds and discarded apple cores have germinated and grown into fruiting trees. From the home garden, from the gardens of family and friends of family, complete strangers who leave apples at their gates, or other neighbours who kindly allow me to pick apples that would otherwise go to waste after a polite note in the letterbox. You may also get access to waste apples from orchards at the end of the season. You need a mix of different types of apples for a well-balanced cider. That's a mix of sweet and of tart. For the tart, you can use Granny Smith's, cooking apples, even japonica apples, drab apples, or quince. And for the sweet, you can use Jazz, Braeburn, Red Delicious, or Fuji. There's a lot of other varieties of apples out there, so be sure to taste any apples of unknown type. I wash apples in salty water. Add 1 to 2 teaspoons of salt into a bowl of cold tap water. Cut the apples into quarters, remove the stems and cores and any bad bits, any codlin moth holes, and any particularly unpleasant looking blemishes on the skin. Rinse the cut apple pieces before putting into a plastic bag. I use reusable Ziploc bags or cheap rubbish bags. Label with the date and the varieties of apples inside. Place the bags of apples in the freezer for at least 3 days. Then remove and place the apples in their bags in a plastic food-grade bucket or metal bowl to thaw. The thawing process can take a variable amount of time depending on the ambient temperature, the size of the apples, and how many in a bag. Before you begin pressing the apples, make sure your press is set up appropriately with the collecting jug ready to receive the juice. Next, empty the thawed apples into the press bucket carefully, trying not to spill too much juice. Place the pressing plate on top of the apples, generally in a plastic bag, the wooden blocks, and then the jack, and then you can start to crank the jack handle. Crank the handle until it is just firm and the juice is starting to flow. Leave it a few minutes, say 5 to 10, and come back and try again. Keep cranking and adding extra blocks if necessary until no further juice flows out. If the jug is just about full before you finish pressing a bucket load of apples, switch vessels, pour the recently pressed juice through a sieve into a stock pot or large saucepan and place it on the stove to heat. You can wait a short time for the next jug to fill, but don't leave it too long because bugs in the fresh juice will set to work starting their family straight away. Once you're ready, heat the juice to 75 to 80 degrees Celsius for about 2 minutes or bring it to the boil for about 10 to 20 seconds. Then allow it to cool to room temperature with the lid on, or you can bottle some hot to keep as straight apple juice. I pour hot apple juice straight out of the stock pot into oven-heated glass bottles and immediately put sterilized caps on the top. I sterilize the caps in boiling water. You know you've got a good seal if the lid makes a popping noise as it depresses as the juice in bottles cool. This process should allow the juice to be stored for an extended period without spoiling. I recommend you retain at least a little bit of this pasteurized straight apple juice. It can be used to make your cider bubbly if that's what you're after, or you can enjoy it as just juice. I recommend watering it down 1 part juice to 4 parts water, or add lemonade if you'd like it to be fizzy. After producing such lovely apple juice, you may not wish to proceed, but if you'd still like to turn it into alcohol, set the juice aside to cool. Make sure it's covered to reduce the chance of environmental contamination. Remember to sanitize all your equipment. Everything should be thoroughly cleaned and then have a certain amount of contact time with the sanitizer depending on the product used. Pour the cooled apple juice through a funnel into the sanitized demijohn fermentation bottle. I measure the specific gravity to get an indication of the sugar content of my juice. You can use a refractometer like this if you have one. I use a hydrometer. These are available from your local brew shop, although mine came from my grandfather's home brew stash. To use the hydrometer, 3/4 fill the sampling tube with your fruit juice. The hydrometer will float in the liquid, and the level indicated will give you the specific gravity. There is a scale on the side that tells you what the final alcohol content can be expected to be when all the sugar is used up. The hydrometer reading is dependent on the ambient temperature. You can add additional sugar, either white or brown, if the indicated alcohol content is going to be too low. Just be aware there is a limitation to how much alcohol you can actually produce, and different yeasts have different tolerances for alcohol. To increase the final alcohol content of your cider by 1%, you need to add 17 grams per litre of additional sugar. Dissolve your additional sugar in boiling water and then allow to cool before adding to the demijohn to make up the final volume. Sprinkle some yeast into the demijohn onto the apple juice. I am very mean with this because I'm so cheap. I use about half a teaspoon from the sachet or a quantity of stored yeast from the previous batch. Fit a rubber bung into the demijohn with an airlock filled with an appropriate level of water. I use a bit of metabisulfite in the airlock just to kill off any bugs. Label the demijohn with the date the yeast was added and the variety of apples used. Include any other details that might be relevant to the brew. Set aside at room temperature, out of direct sunlight. This should start bubbling within a day, depending on how mean you were with the yeast and the ambient temperature. After 10 to 14 days, the bubbling will probably slow and stop as all the sugar is used up. Draw off a sample with your clean and sanitized siphon and test the specific gravity again. If it is down to 1.000, you're done and ready to bottle. It is important to get everything set up before you start the bottling process. I have two different types of siphon. One is a pump style and the other is a bellows style. I prefer the bellows style for cider because the pump style has a bigger hose and tends to run too fast for the small 330ml cider bottles I use. Make sure your siphon and your bottles and your caps are already sterilized and ready to go. Put your new or recycled caps into a bowl of boiling water, ready to place on the bottles once they have been filled. Place your demijohn up on an upside down bucket or stock pot and your clean bottles in the sink or on the floor so that there's a good gravitational fall. Place the hose end of your siphon into the demijohn. Make sure you've sterilized the tube and place the other end into the first empty bottle. You may need a hand to hold both of these things together and operate either the bellows or the pump. Activate the siphon and fill the bottles to about 5 centimeters from the top. You can add about 2.5 centimeters of pasteurized or boiled apple juice to add a little bit of extra sugar to allow any remaining yeast to produce some additional bubbles through fermentation. This can make your cider just a little bit fizzy, but not enough to blow the caps off. At least that's the plan. Apply caps to the filled bottles. Wipe them down so that they're clean, and then you can affix labels that have meaningful information on them, including the year of bottling. Now all that's left to do is to clean up and store your cider bottles somewhere out of direct sunlight in a cool place. You can start to enjoy this cider as early as 14 days after bottling, but I'd recommend leaving it a little bit longer than that to allow the secondary fermentation to create a few bubbles. Once bottled, you can probably keep it quite happily for a year or even longer. As I mentioned earlier, you can reuse yeast from a previous batch. All you need to do is prepare a sanitized mason jar and lid. After siphoning off the cider, pour the lees into the jar, leaving minimal space for air. Tighten the lid and keep the lees in the fridge until needed or used straight away. Now you can enjoy your own handcrafted apple cider. Thank you and goodbye. The thawing process can take a variable amount of time depending on the ambient temperature, the size of the apples, and how many in a bag.
Section 4, Part 3, Fermenting for cider. If you are still keen on making alcohol, let the juice cool.
Section 2. Quarter the apples, remove any bad bits and the cores, then bag them and put them in the freezer for 3 days.
Section 3. Press the apples. Carefully put the thawed apples into the press.
What do you mean I'm low resolution? Have you checked your screen settings?